Angel. Alex is here. It's here. Clara is here. Right? Clara. Tanner. Hannah. Where? Here. Haley is here. Sierra. Sierra? What's that? Ryan? Joshua. Elijah. Gus. David. Luis. Cameron. Kendall. Zoe. George. Trish. All right, Sierra. All right. Left off here. So I think you said make a vector of even numbers, right? Did you do it? Let's check it out. All right, so even numbers. Just review. We're making an object. Make the object by using our arrow, so the less than sign and then the dash, or the equal sign. The single equal sign would do the same thing. So we make our vector using the combine function. All right, make the vector using the combine function, and then we save it as our name. So let's get my cursor over here. So that's what we want to save it as. We create our vector, and then we run it, and we know that when we run it, we have even numbers. So I open up R. Nothing is in there, but I can open up the RMD file, and everything that we did should be there. So we're just going to continue plugging along, continue updating this. All right, so, yep.
Mine is not allowing me to open it.
Uh-oh. So what you probably need to do, so mine, when I just open RStudio, it's already on there. What you may need to do is do your open file, and then instead of clicking the shortcut up here, you may need to go to this PC and then do, when you click on this PC, you're looking for your network drive. And then when you click on your network drive, you'll see all of those shortcuts. Try that and see if that works. So that's how we had to save some of these files. And this is how I have to open them. It complains that it doesn't know the locations of it. All right, so we open it up, we have the even numbers, and we will continue. So we checked it, it was in my environment, that's good. All right, so now we're going to move on to creating data frames. So data frame is simply a collection of vectors. But when we put these vectors together, we're going to call it a data frame because some of our functions need a data frame. They need the structure of a data frame, which is each column is its own variable. And the other advantage of that is when you put them in the data frame, each item number corresponds to the same row. All right. So our rules, our column represents a variable, and it's going to have a name attached to it. That name then we can reference directly as long as we tell R that this variable is within the data frame itself. All right. So when we create the data frame, we can create it using the data.frame function. All that does is basically says, okay, take these vectors and create a data frame. Now, with the data.frame, I have the ellipses here to specify that we have to tell it what to include in the data frame. And what this is essentially a list of the vectors. All right, but we could give it the list of the vectors, in which case the name of the variable will be the name of that vector, or we can actually specify the name by using this tag equals value format. And again, you don't write tag equals value. What you're putting in is the name of the variable or the name of that column, how we want R to know that column, and then the value is the vector that we're putting it in. So, as an example, we're going to create a data frame called data.nums, and it's going to be the odd number vector and the even number vector, but we're going to change the names so that it appears as odd and even. So we're going to move back to our markdown so we can kind of add notes to it. All right, so data frames. Data frames are a collection of vectors held within a data table. I'll say data table. All right, it's not technically a table, but it's a frame within a data frame. We can save the data frame with a specific name. All right. The format for creating data frame is this. All right. So it is our we're going to do dat.name, so just something that we can name it, just whatever. It doesn't have to be dat.name. It could be data1. It could be tree diameters. All right. It could be experiment 1. It could be any number of things. But we're going to save our data frame. So there's our data frame function, data.frame. We're going to save that as the name, dat.name. And then what we're going to do is tag1 equals vector1, tag2 equals vector2, ... All right. So dat.name will be the name of the data frame. Tag1, so we're just kind of adding more information to our notes. So tag1 is the name in the data frame for vector1. And vector1 is the first vector, or column in our data frame. Something like that. So I think that's probably a good description of it. All right, so as an example, all right, I'm going to create my chunk. I'm going to do exactly what our handout or our presentation asked us to do. So we want dat.nums. That's what we want the data frame to be called. We're going to do data.frame. And then we want the odd nums and the even nums vectors in that data frame, but we want to change their name. So I'm going to do odd equals odd nums, and then even equals even nums. And I'm not going to run it yet. This will create a data frame called dat.nums that consists of the odd nums and even nums vector. The variable names in the data frame will be odd and even. So hopefully this is clear enough to where as I typed it out and as I verbalized it, you can see what this function is doing. We verbalized the function. Now, is this going to work? Did you run it? Try to run it. Did it work? So I run it and I get this error. The question is why? And if you run it, you might get the same error. Maybe you don't. So why the error?
It hasn't stored the odd number value yet, because you haven't run it since you opened it.
Yeah, so it tells us error in data.frame. Okay, so it's telling you it's an error in this function. And it says object odd nums not found. It can't find it. All right, it doesn't know where it is. Why? It's because we didn't create it yet. We did that on Wednesday. When we opened this file up, this RMD, we didn't run everything yet. The only thing we ran was the even nums. So it knows where even nums is. It is in memory. But odd nums isn't. So what we have to do is kind of go back up here. We have to make sure we run that chunk so that now odd nums and even nums is in memory. And then once we create this data frame, or once we run this chunk, it now creates our data frame. And you'll notice that in the global environment, we now have dat.nums in the environment, and that is listed under data. So it's listed up here. So note, when opening an RMD file, it is not automatically all chunks are not run automatically. We did not create odd nums yet, so we have to run that chunk before running the dat.nums chunk. Something like that. So again, if you encounter the error, you say, okay, how do I create the data frame? You open this back up during the exam, you look at it, say, okay, here's my code, let me run it, and I get the error. You're like, oh crap, why doesn't it work now? Hey, we've added a note that addresses that error. We're going to probably encounter errors like that all the time throughout this semester, where we run the command, we type in an object, and it'll say object not found. All right, and that's your clue to say, okay, something's not in memory correct. Maybe I didn't read it in. Maybe when I read in the data file, there was a problem with that. So the data.frame failed. So like we have this, and then 3, 4, 5 chunks down the row, we use this data frame, and when we use that, it complains, hey, dat.nums isn't found. And you're like, what? I created it. It should be there. Well, when we go back and check, we have an error on that chunk. So we have to go fix that. All right, what do you have? Error message? Arguments imply different number of rows. So here's another Let me modify mine real quick. And so we get the error. Gonna run that. All right, so I've got my odd nums, I've got my even nums. I run this, and I get this. Here's an error message. That's what yours says, right? All right, so arguments imply differing number of rows. So what that means is that we're trying to create a data table that has a different number of items in each of the vectors. So in this case, it's off by 1. So one vector has 6 items, the other vector has 5 items. So we've got 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. So we've got 6 odd numbers in that vector, but we only have 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. We only have 5 in the even numbers. That's why that threw off the error. So I had it go up to 12 just so we match. And then that gets rid of the error message. Are we likely to encounter that error? Much probably not. We don't normally create these data frames throughout the class. Normally I give you the data and then you import the data basically as a data frame itself. So the chance that we encounter that error again will be pretty low. Yep.
I have an issue.
Okay.
It says that even is not found, but it's in my environment.
Even nums. Did you misspell it? Capitalize?
Even.
Did you reverse the order? Right.
Hey.
I do have a slide like useful tips or common errors. Yeah, the spelling. Yep. Yeah, if they're not in that order, it'll still work. It'll just differ in how it looks. So let me do this. Det not nums. So this is how it looks. This is how our markdown changes it. It says I've got a data table. Now this is something that you might see in Excel. All right, you've got your odd. That's our header. Even's our header. Each of these items. We put them in there so each row, if we have a 1 here, we've got a 2 there. If we have a 3 here, we've got a 4 there, and so forth. If we reverse things, and I'll do the even, we'll go 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. So put them in opposite order, and then we run it. What you see is that it puts it in that order that we specified. For this part, we're just introducing you to how to make these things, so it doesn't really matter what that order is. But a lot of times it does, because each row actually represents the lowest measurement individual. The individual usually it could be it's our lowest level of classification on which data are collected. So if we were doing like a community study and looking at community diversity, each row would represent an individual habitat. So this is habitat 1, this is habitat 2, this is habitat 3, and in habitat 1 we need to match up the numbers that we collected for that habitat. So for now, it doesn't really matter what order, but yeah, in the future it usually does. All right.
It's still not working.
Still not working. You have a plus sign there. Rows. Here is 5. So now you saw that you look up for rows. Now run that. All right. You guys got it? There it is. All right. So we created our data frames. All right, practice. This is practice exercise. All right, we're gonna make, what I want you to do is make a data frame called data.cars. All right, and inside that data frame, we're gonna have 4 different variables. All right, variable 1 is gonna be called cars. And inside the cars, you're going to have 5 values. You're going to have GMC, Chevy, Ford, Toyota, and Nissan. Variable 2 will be called number, and we have these 5 values in these orders. So 5, 7, 5, 3, 1. And then variable 3, I want you to call it MPG, and it should have these numbers in that order. All right, and you can check your work by typing in data.cars just to make sure that everything lines up. Now, I will tell you, for the numbers, when we created vectors using numbers, we can do the number and separate each number with a comma. When we do text, it's going to be a little bit different, because when we just type stuff out, R is looking for objects, it's looking for functions. So if we just put in GMC, Chevy, Toyota, and so forth in our vector, it's going to look for the object or a function named GMC. It's going to look for like Chevy object or function. To get around that, to tell R we want these specific text items in there as a vector, we have to enclose them in quotation marks. You can use either single quotes or double quotes. All right. So if you open with double quotes, then you close with double quotes. If you open with single quotes, you close with single quotes. All right. I prefer single quotes so that I don't have to use the shift key. But it's up to you. And as with the other nice thing, you'll see this on one of the headers. You can use them together. So if you have a double quotes, you can have single quotes inside of them to have a specific meaning as well. So go ahead and try to do this. Try to make the data frame, and I'll get my example up so that we can see what it looks like. See if it works. Yep. It typically does that if you open up the browser and it's not wide enough. I should say this. The quotes are around each item, not the list. It's around each item. All right. What's your error?
It has all my comments highlighted in red on the
Oh, because you're missing something at the beginning of your parentheses. Remember what we needed? It looked like everything else should work if you do that. Yep. Error message. Okay. Oh, yeah, we gotta create the jump. You need that the curly braces right after that to tell it what kind of jump it's gonna make. Oh. Yep, yep. So you are combining everything all at once. So then you'll need a comma. Because now you have a second column. Around that list, because cars, you want all of that information in cars, right? Alright. So you're gonna get an error message if you just leave it like that. Because what it's looking for is a vector. So you're gonna have to make that as a vector. Yeah, so what we have to do is we're gonna have a vector of those values, and then we're gonna save them as cars. Yep, yep, yep. No, well, yes, so that you'll need commas between each of the other two. Yeah, but then that lists your cars. Yep, yep. Is that? Good. Yep. Yep. I'm just gonna kind of break it apart.
Oh, yeah, I said the face salad and then we did it. That's not even.
That gets you those.
Right.
Those. That should.
I did, I like it.
Yep. So now what you have to do is get those into data.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a two-step process. Okay, let me finish this and then get mine in there. We were going to call it data.cars, data.cars.
Okay. So what do you want to do?
All right, so I think we're getting there. So let me go through mine So what I like to do is make this kind of a two-step process. First, I create the vectors that I need. Once I create the vectors, then I pass them to our data frame function to create it. So create the vectors, and then step 2, create the data frame. So here's our first step. I'm going to create the vectors. Now remember, when we create the vectors, we create it using the combine function, lowercase c. I've got quotes around each of my items. I've got a comma separating each items. So R sees this as item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5. And I'm going to save that as cars. And then here's my number and my MPG, 23.2. All right, so MPG. And I run it. So then they all appear. I have vectors of them, and it all works. Then, once I have these vectors, I'm going to create the data frame. And it's data.frame, and then cars, number, and MPG. Now, on here, I note that I named the vectors with the names that should appear in the data table. So I basically used the header names as the vector names. Because I did that, I don't have to use that tag equals vector format. I can just pass the actual vector names themselves, data.frame, cars, number, MPG, and it'll work. All right. This way, this is the same thing as this. And in fact, this is what R actually does. It looks to see, do I have something that looks like this, where I have a tag equals a value? If not, if I only have this, then R will convert this to cars equals cars and number equals number, because this data.frame is what's considered a higher level function that will then kind of break the initial function down into smaller parts and pass that onto other functions built into the R system. All right, so we kind of made things simple, made things simpler for us, easier for us. Now, a couple of you were saying, hey, can I just do this all in one step? And you can. All right, we can. We could do it all in one step, and the reason it works is because R does the calculations in a nested manner. This works because R works from inside parentheses. Let's see, parentheses to outside parentheses. So it's going to do things inside parentheses first and keeps it in memory and passes that into the functions outside of its own parentheses. So here's an example. Data.cars. We're going to do data.frame. All right. And the first thing we're going to do is this. So I'm going to hit enter at the end of that. So when I did data.frame, it added the parentheses. All right, this can all be a single line, and this is a nice part about R. All right, so let me go down here, bring this up a little bit. So the nice thing about R is that it keeps track of the same line. So when you hit enter, let's go back here, it automatically indented it to let you know that we are still on the same line. All right, we're still in our data.frame function. So first up is cars. So I'm going to create cars. All right, and we can use the arrow or we can use the equal sign. And I'm going to use the equal sign because it's kind of like the tag function. So in the column named cars, I want these values to appear. So I'm going to copy these and paste them. Now, I can hit enter and it puts me on a new line. But it's going to complain. It's going to fail. Because what I need is a comma. I need to tell R that this first line, cars, our vector with these names, comma, that is our data that should appear in the very first column. After that comma, we have our second column. So we've got number. And again, I'm going to create our vector using these numbers. And then that's the end of that column, so I'm going to hit comma and then enter, and our last one, MPG. Copy it, paste it. That's the end. Right? That's the end. And everything's in here. R sees this all as a single command. So what R will do is run this and save it in memory as cars. It runs this and saves it in the memory as numbers. It runs this, saves it as MPG, and then it goes to the next one, to this parentheses, and says, okay, well, we're running that data.frame. We're using everything that's in our memory to create it. It already knows what cars is, it knows what number, it knows what MPG. All in a single step, I hit enter, or I run it, and we've got our dat.cars. How you do this is up to you. All right, just from like a coding perspective and readability perspective, this way is readable, right? Is it better than creating vectors and then creating data frame? I wouldn't say it's better. I wouldn't say it's worse. It's just a different way to do it. What I will say, and this is just an example, I'm going to be deleting this. This way, where we put everything on one line, is hard to read. It's hard, to me, this is very hard to read. But it works. This is the exact same as this. And it would work. All right, so we can check data.cars to make sure it works. All right, we type it, we run it. It looks like this. We've got cars, we've got number, we've got MPG. All right. Now, other things with this data frame. When we type it in, we get our rows, our table like this. It gives us some information. CHR. This means that this column is a character column. All right, it's a text-based column. All right, these, in terms of our variable types, this would be a qualitative variable, a nominal type of variable. We use its name to convey our information. These are DBLs, doubles. Right? It's just in how they store in memory. All right? But that means it's numeric data. All right? It's numbers. So DBL would be numbers, character would be text-based, and then it also tells us we have 5 rows total. If we had more than 5 rows, it's not going to make this massive document. It will when you print it out, usually. All right? When you print it out, it will print everything. But on the window, it'll add pages. And it'll say, we've got X number of rows. These are rows 1 to 10. And then you've got the next that'll show 11 to 20, and then 21 to 30. We'll see that. We'll see that. I'll demonstrate that. The other thing is right up here. In our environment window, it has data.cars. It tells us we have 5 observations. We have 5 rows, basically. And it's in 3 variables, 3 columns. It also has this drop-down. I can click the drop-down, and it tells me the variable names. It tells me it's cars, number, and MPG. Not only that, it tells me that cars is a character vector, and it actually reveals the values in quotes, so you know, okay, it's a nominal variable type. It's text-based. For number, it's a number. For MPG, it's a number, and it gives these. Again, if we had a lot more data, it'll tell you the data that fits in this window. If you have more data points, it uses the ellipses to tell you that there's more. So if I give you a data set and say, hey, what variable names are in this data table? One way that you can do it is get it into memory and then do the drop-down box and say, yeah, these are the names. Or you type in data.cars and you look at the headers and say, these are the names. there's also a function called names that'll do that too. Alternate methods. Any questions? Yep. You have an error message. What's your error message? And you have a comment after that. Yep. All right. So how often are we going to create data tables? Not really. We're really not going to be creating many data tables. If we make a data table, it's just to do a quick table, maybe as practice. But normally, when you have data, your way to input it and to get it into R is to put it into some sort of spreadsheet. Put it into Excel, put it into LibreOffice, put it into Google Docs, something like that. And then once it's in that document, we save it in a format that we can then load into R. All right? Majority of the data sets that we will work with will be data sets that I give you. It's not all of them, because we will use data sets that are built into memory. All right. Those data sets that are built into memory will include the base packages. So when you start R, it has a list of data frames that we can access that are available to us. And we also have packages that have their own data frames. So we can open up or load packages and then access their data. Or we can just tell R, hey, I want to access this specific data frame from this other package, but I don't want you to load that package. Just give me the data frame and R will do it. All right? So the external data then is the data that I give you. Now with the data that I give you, R can actually read several different types of data types. All right? It can read Excel. You need a package to read an Excel table. But what I recommend is saving, you're going to work in Excel, you're going to save it as an Excel document. When it's ready to transfer into R, you will save that worksheet as a CVS, a comma delimited file. And then you import that CVS file right into R. That's going to be my recommendation. Why? This has been built in since the very first version of R, and it's very stable. It's not going away. The Excel stuff has definitely improved, and on this version 4, it's actually pretty good. But who knows what's going to happen when Microsoft comes out with their next Office version? Who knows if it'll work? CSVs are standards. All right.
Is it CSV or CVS? Because you said it both ways.
CSV. Did I say CVS? CSV, comma delimited file. A comma separated value file, I think is the abbreviation. There's also text files. So I'm going to use CVS. I did say that. I did say it. Thank you. I save it as CSV files instead of a text file, because that way, if it has this CSV on it, R will know exactly how the columns are separated. If we just import a TXT file, we have to usually tell R what separates our variables. All right, so reading an internal data frame is going to be first, and doing this is super easy. All right, doing it is super easy. So just to see what is in memory, what we have access to, all that you have to do is type the data set or data and then open and close and view it. All right, so now I'm going to go back to R. All right, so we're moving on. We've already created objects. All right, that was our first heading. Now we're reading in data. All right, so first up, loading internal data. Our data sets that are in R's memory. Alright. We can view the list of, I'm going to use in-memory datasets by doing this. So data, open, close. I'm going to run it. Let's go back to here. When I run that chunk, you will see now that we have a new tab that opens up here called R Datasets. So the datasets that are directly accessible are found in the R Datasets tab at the top of this window. There it goes. So if you run it, it will appear, and here they are. So the datasets package is simply a package of just datasets. That's all it is. And these are automatically loaded when we start R. All of these. So to access any of these, all that we have to do is type their name. So women is one dataset. All that you have to do is type women, and it is accessible. It prints it out. If we are calculating an average, let's say average height, we don't have to do anything different. Women is accessible. We just specify what value or what variable we want to calculate the average. So what we're going to do is end here because we're almost done. We're going to kind of pick up this data set, and then we're going to talk about loading data from other packages without loading those packages in memory. And we'll talk about importing data sets that I give you. All right? What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll get that R back up so if you want to get it. Don't forget, when we're done, when you're done with this RMD, go ahead and save. I'm not going to create a new one. I saw students last year create a new RMD for every class day. I mean, maybe you save as and update file name, to include the date, but I think this is all part of this basics of R presentation. It should be easy to kind of match it with that presentation that we're working on. That's kind of my personal feeling. But yeah, I'm going to save it, make sure it's there. Yep. And then when you close R, it'll ask you, do you want to save the history or the workspace? Hit no. We'll be good. All right. All right. We're good to go. We'll pick this up on Monday. Monday we'll probably finish this R intro, and then we'll start on variables and stuff. Maybe in lab, or it might not be until Wednesday. It just kind of depends on how we get through it. All right.